Hello and welcome to a Who's Up and Who's Down Peston special with John Ashworth, the Shadow Health Minister, on why we should trust Labour to save public services. The Tory Housing Minister, Robert Jenrick, on why we should trust the Tories to save public services. Our very own politics stato, Anushka Asthana, who I trust with my life. The former Tory Minister David Gauke on why he doesn't trust either of the big parties. And our own circle of trust, the SNP's John Nicholson, Labour's Lucy Powell and the Tories' Baroness Walsey. Watcher, well, we're into the second half of this staggeringly depressing contest with both his side and his side offering us assorted bribes and supposed goodies, mostly worked up on the back of a fag packet and lacking any kind of robust detail. Now, if that feels odd, another break with tradition is that religious leaders have waded into the debate, with the chief rabbi warning him that the Jewish community fears a Labour victory, and the Muslim Council of Britain accusing him of alienating Muslims. Johnson said sorry. Corbyn said he'll be crusading against racism till he dies, but he didn't say sorry. So, what is all this doing for you? Is it having an impact on how you will cast that vote? Well, Anushka knows. Tell me, please, what do we know?
Well, there's been quite a lot of tension because in the last 45 minutes, we've had the poll that lots of people have been waiting for. And this is my chance to be seriously geeky because I'm about to tell you about, are you ready for this? YouGov's multi-level regression and post-stratification poll, known as an MRP. And that is a method that takes a massive sample, in this case over 100,000 people, and then models their vote preferences based on age, gender, education and so on against what is happening politically in their seats. So overall, that YouGov poll has the Tories on 359 and Labour on 211. That is a big majority of 68, with the Lib Dems only gaining 1 to 13 without any of the high-profile defectors taking seats. The SNP, under this model, go up 8 to 43. Now, in terms of seats changing hands, that would mean, have a look at this, that the Tories gain 44 from Labour and Labour gain none from anywhere. It would suggest that the Lib Dems take 1 from Labour and 1 as a net gain from the Tories, while the SNP take 5 from Labour, 2 from the Tories and 1 from the Lib Dems. Now, the reason for the excitement is this same model predicted a hung parliament in 2017, including specific seat results that happened, but big caveats. These are best estimates based on current data. There is a lot of uncertainty when you are modelling so many different factors, and a lot can change. There's 2 weeks to go, and the projected margins of victory are below 5% in at least 30 seats predicted to be Tory. Now, I suspect that Tory chief strategist Dominic Cummings knew this was coming, given that a blog he wrote earlier today seemed to reference it. He entitled it Bat Signal, which is what he said he would tell Leave voters when he thought Brexit was at risk. And here is what he said. You'll see many polls in the coming days. Some will say Boris will win, but trust me, as someone who has worked on a lot of campaigns, things are much tighter than they seem, and there is a very real possibility of a hung parliament. He said he understood why people might vote for Corbyn, but that would put Brexit at risk. I guess you say he would say that, but there you go, Robert.
Thanks, Anushka. So, a fair amount to chew over with my distinguished guest, Saida, former chairman of the Tory party. Who do you trust? YouGov, this is a poll of more than 100,000 people, and as Anushka just pointed out, it was the poll in 2017 that predicted what most of the other pollsters were not predicting at the time, which is that Labour would get very close, and that's why people are taking this one so seriously this time. Dominic Cummings, the most important advisor to the Prime Minister, says he thinks it could well turn out to be much narrower, much tighter than this is saying. What's your sense of where we are?
Well, I think this is good news and bad news for the Conservatives. Good news because I think secretly we'll be quite confident that this is exactly where we needed to be at this stage. And so far, the election campaign has gone to plan. But bad news because I think the concern will be that some of the voters that would normally have maybe, you know, Labour switches to the Conservative Party, other people who would have voted for us may suddenly feel, well, actually, we don't really need to bother because the Conservatives have got this in the bag. So I think there's going to be a lot of expectation management coming over the next couple of weeks. And there's still kind of big interviews for the Prime Minister, for Boris, to do. So I think it'll be kind of tentatively confidence in CCHQ, but obviously still a lot to play for.
Lucy, obviously under election rules, we can't discuss individual seats. But where you are, you had a pretty solid majority last time. But I've been talking to quite a lot of your colleagues in the Midlands and the North, and they are very anxious about losing their seats, some of your colleagues, to the Tories. Does this feel to you like a snapshot of genuinely where we are? Do you think, I mean, if you exclude the speakers, you know, this is minus 50 for Labour, which is pretty depressing, I would think, for you.
Well, it's a pretty depressing snapshot, but it's not a prediction, is it? And that's what polls aren't. I mean, I've been going around lots of marginal seats, particularly in the North and the Midlands, and knocking on doors. And what I found is that actually there's still a lot of voters who are undecided, a lot of unsure voters who are sort of don't like either party or really can't make up their minds yet. So, you know, there's another poll out today that puts a smaller gap, and I think, you know, there's still a lot to play for here. But one message I would take from this poll, as it stands, which is something I have seen across the doorstep, is that where it's most of a challenge for Labour is in the Leave seats, is in Leave areas. And this is not the narrative that many in our party and many in the media thought we needed to be at this stage in the election. For 2 years, there's been some people in our party saying all we needed to do was to be uber Remain and we'd be the Remain party and we'd romp home in a general election. But actually, this poll is showing what some of us have been warning, which is that people who have voted Labour a long time but also voted for Brexit are now struggling to know where to go.
Well, I mean, though some people would argue that given that you're facing in both directions, in order to keep these Leave seats, actually, you'd have been better off being more unambiguously Remain, and you might have made gains elsewhere. But we'll come back to all of that.
But there's no gains. What gains would be made? I mean, you know, there's no Lib Dem gains here, are there? So, you know, I think Jeremy I think has taken a very good position on Brexit, trying to stay above the fray, saying he would stay neutral in trying to do that.
Well, according to this, it's not working.
It's not working. No, it's not working potentially, but we'll see.
We'll see, as you say.
It's not working. It would show, wouldn't it, the second worst performance by Labour since the war, after only Michael Foot.
But this is a sort of mixed blessing, I would say, for the SNP. And why do I say that? It does show you would make gains of 8 seats, is what it says. But you are, well, your leader is on the record as saying that Boris Johnson as Prime Minister would be a disaster. Actually, you know, if it hadn't been for you pushing for the election, we might not have had one. So many people would say, OK, the SNP has made gains, but you've delivered the outcome you hate, or you might deliver the outcome you hate most, which is Boris Johnson in Downing Street and Brexit and all those things you oppose.
Well, let's see, because there's another poll out today, the Comrades poll in the Telegraph, which shows a much smaller lead for the Tories, only 7 points. And as you know, there's
still a 10-seat majority under that poll.
67-point lead are required for a majority, aren't they? So we're almost in hung parliamentary territory there. I think there's 2 very different elections going on, north and south of the border. What I notice north of the border is Tories are scunnered with the Conservative Party, as we say in Scotland. Boris Johnson is enormously unpopular. Lots of Tories are not even putting the word Conservative on their leaflets that they're putting out round the door. And I think what we're likely to see is a lot of tactical voting, because all the parties realise that in Scotland it's a battle between the SNP in first place and the Tories. So if you want to beat a Tory MP, you've got to vote SNP.
John, so much to pick up with all of you in a moment. There's plenty I want to say to about all of that. Sorry, I'm not moving, it turns out. But anyway, I'm delighted to be joined down the line by the Shadow Health Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth. Jonathan, very good to see you. It looks rather wet where you are, so I'm particularly grateful that you are braving the elements for us. You'll be aware of this poll in the Times this evening from YouGov showing a Tory majority of 68. Does it feel as bad as that to you?
Well, look, there's 2 weeks to go, and I'm sure there'll be more opinion polls. But let's be absolutely honest. If that is what is going to happen in this election, that is a thumping great victory for Boris Johnson, a bigger victory than Tony Blair got in his final term. And I think people have got to start thinking now, do we really want Boris Johnson for the next 5 years, running the NHS, which the waiting lists are already at 4.5 million. How much worse are those waiting lists going to get if Boris Johnson has got a victory of that size? How much worse are the waiting lists for cancer treatment going to get? How many more people are going to be languishing on trolleys? 600,000 in the last year languishing on trolleys in our hospital corridors. How much worse is that going to get if Boris Johnson has got 5 more years in Downing Street with a majority of that magnitude?
But John,
people like me have got to get out there and make the argument for the future of the NHS, which is at stake in this election, and not to give Boris Johnson a great majority like that. Because what will be the state of the NHS after 5 more years of the Tories?
But John, you have been saying this now for day after day, and it isn't cutting through. And the reason it's probably not cutting through is partly because in many constituencies, people are more interested in Brexit. They see a clear position from the government or from the Prime Minister, from the Tories, and an ambiguous position from you.
Yeah, but look, when you've got so many people waiting for treatment, languishing on trolleys, elderly people languishing on trolleys, a Second World War veteran of 99 languishing on a trolley in a hospital corridor for 10 hours just last week in one of our hospitals. We and the Labour Party have got to start reminding people and saying to people, do you want 5 more years of this happening to our NHS with Boris Johnson completely unleashed with that massive majority doing whatever he likes? I mean, most people wouldn't trust Boris Johnson as far as they could throw him. Do they really want him to have a majority that size to do what he wants to continue to push our NHS into the ground? So that is the challenge for Labour politicians like me. We've got to make that argument much more persuasively in the final 2 weeks of this campaign.
But as you say, trust for many people is a huge issue. And on that front, many people, have said, do say, that it would have helped your side if Jeremy Corbyn had said sorry to the Jewish community. That would have rebuilt trust not only with that community, but more widely with that. Why didn't he say sorry?
Yeah. Well, he has, in fairness to him, said sorry in the past. And I was on ITV this morning on Good Morning Britain, and I expressed my sorrow, and I apologised to the Jewish community because I understand the hurt that the Jewish community is feeling, and I recognise that we in the Labour Party have to take that seriously, and we have to get better at dealing with instances of anti-Semitism in our party, which is a tiny minority, I should emphasise and stress. But we've obviously got to get much better with our procedures for dealing with them. And when we have candidates and members saying quite disgusting, foul things, often on Facebook and social media, they need to be dealt with swiftly. We have improved the procedures, they have got better, but we've obviously got to go further as well.
Well, we had the Archbishop of Canterbury only today saying it's not just about internal procedures, it's what all of you, especially the leader, say publicly in order to convince the wider world that you really get it. And a clear signal from the Archbishop of Canterbury is he doesn't think that enough people do believe that Labour gets it on anti-Semitism.
Well, I would certainly get it, and I would hope that the Archbishop of Canterbury would if he's met me. I've actually met him here in Leicester once before, but I hope he would think that I get it, and I think everybody in the Labour Party gets it. And to be fair, Jeremy Corbyn has apologised for this. If you go and Google it, you'll find examples of him apologising for this in the past. But look, I recognise the hurt, the anger that the Jewish community is feeling. I'm very upset about that. I want to do something about it, which is why, if we've got to make further changes in our procedures, then we have to make them quickly and rapidly.
Now, you used to work with Gordon Brown, somebody who worked...
He certainly did.
And he worked day and night to make the Labour Party a credible force when it came to managing the public finances. So you must have been horrified
That's
when...
certainly true.
You must have been horrified when you saw a Labour manifesto which said, these are all our commitments and they're fully funded. And then literally hours later, another 58 billion commitment is announced and there's no funding for it. I mean, that is exactly the sort of thing that Labour used to do in the past, which meant that many people said you weren't fit to govern.
Well, I was delighted when I saw a Labour manifesto that's ploughing an extra £26 billion into our National Health Service. It's putting more money into our social care services,
But
which
you
have
won't
been
have the
absolutely
opportunity to
decimated
do that
under
unless
the Tories. It's putting
people
more money into our
believe your
schools, so-
numbers, John.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we put forward how we're going to fund our NHS investment, how we're going to fund our schools investment, how we're going to bring back Sure Start centres, how we're going to invest in expanding childcare. It was all there in our manifesto.
But then you sprung an enormous £58 billion surprise on all of us. The compensation for women born in the 1950s whose pension payments were delayed, and then said, well, you know, we probably have to borrow the money. That does not exactly reinforce confidence in the party's ability to manage the finances
But
of the country.
that is a compensation measure to deal with a cohort of women whose pensions have been snatched away because of changes that David Cameron's government introduced. And actually 170,000 of those women have been pushed into poverty as a result of these changes. So I think it is a fair and reasonable way in which to deal with a problem that women have been facing who have been ignored so far by the government. In fact, Boris Johnson just completely dismissed them out of hand.
Hang on. No one would dismiss the hardship of, as you say, many older women in these circumstances, but not all of the women who are getting the compensation are exactly, hard up. I mean, for example, Theresa May is exactly the right age to get £30,000 from you. Why is Labour coming up with 58 billion of money to give £30,000 to very well-heeled people like the former Prime Minister? What's the point of that?
Because we think, because we're universalist in our approach to social security, and this is a group of women who was doing the right thing, saving for their pension. And my mum is one who was affected by it. You know, as she would say, she paid her stamps. She would use that phrase. And many of these women, as it were, paid their stamps, as it were. And then then the goalposts were moved, quite rapidly by David Cameron's government. So this is a fair compensatory measure.
Although I have to
measure over the number of years of the next Parliament. But I think it's important to deliver fairness for that group of women.
I do have to sort of correct you on one thing, though. It is true that David Cameron did move the goalposts as one element of what happened, but the big change was made in 1995, and most of these people had 15, 16 years to prepare for it. If you'd simply decided to provide compensation for the moving of the goalposts from the beginning of the austerity period, what you'd be handing over would be a fraction of this £58 billion. If you targeted it at people who are most hard up, it would be a fraction. It does seem to many people, when there are many families as a result of austerity living on the breadline, and you are not actually taking steps to completely wipe out the benefits freeze that George Osborne put in place, seems a very odd use of resources.
But we are taking other measures to support other families who, as you say, are in dire straits. We are getting rid of the bedroom tax, for example, which has caused huge hardship in many communities across the land. We're scrapping universal credit and we'll replace it with a much fairer system, because universal credit means that our child poverty rates are climbing higher and higher. Child poverty in this country will be worse than it ever was under Margaret Thatcher, will be worse than it ever was under John Major. That's happening under this Tory government. And come back to my original point at the start of the interview, can you imagine what child poverty will be like if Boris Johnson gets 5 more years with a huge majority to do what he wants? These are the issues which are at stake in this election campaign, and these are the issues that we're fighting on.
But that said, and of course the Resolution Foundation reinforces the point that you say this is not a government that's got to grips with child poverty, but it also says that because of your choices, it is completely conceivable that at the end of a Labour government, based on your manifesto, there could be more children in poverty than there are today. And that seems an extraordinary thing for a Labour government to be campaigning in an election on.
But we are investing in childcare support. We're investing in bringing back the Sure Start centres, which were cruelly cut under this Conservative government. We're investing in our National Health Service and children's health in particular, because we've got a children's health crisis, I believe, in this country, with our childhood obesity rates far worse than childhood obesity rates in other countries in Western Europe. Children's tooth decay far worse than many other countries. 100,000 children admitted to hospital in the last few years because of tooth decay. So we're going to invest in children's health. We've got a set of policies which is going to prioritise children like never before. And why we're doing that is because if you invest in children, not only does it benefit those as individuals, it strengthens our society for the future as well. It's the right thing to do.
John, good to see you as always. Go in and get warm and dry, but I'm very grateful for your time. See you soon.
Thank you.
So a lot to pick up with my distinguished guests. Lucy, I do want to sort of pick up with you. I mean, what is the point of a Labour policy that, gives £30,000 to Theresa May?
Well, I mean, you could pick out these individually.
It's not an anomaly. There are many, many, many retired people living on, as you know, much higher incomes than young people. And yet, many people say this is frankly, a cynical bribe to persuade a lot of older people to vote Labour. Well,
it's worked with some, because I've met quite a few who are now going to vote Labour because of this policy, including my aunties. But no, I mean, I think there's a serious point here. I think this is about an injustice that was done. Women who didn't know that the changes were going to come in, they weren't informed properly of what that meant.
But is there no element of caveat emptor any longer in, our public life? I mean, these changes took place in 1995.
Well, no,
those people had ample time to prepare.
I don't think that's the case, actually. Some of it began in 1995, but people were not communicated with
properly. The equalisation of pensions was put into law in 95.
Yeah, but then it was accelerated greatly.
2 years. It was accelerated. It was supposed to be in 2020, and it was accelerated to 2018. That's not greatly. That's 2 years.
I know, but these are also women that have had a sort of double or triple whammy sort of issue with some of their pensions as well, because they missed out on the secondary contribution. Many of them took breaks from their careers in the 70s to have children where there was no maternity leave. They had to give up work completely. So they've contributed in other ways. So for women of this age group, pensioner poverty is a real issue because they haven't built up the same amount of stamps as their male colleagues. And I think when we look back at other issues like this, where local government workers, women were paid a lot less, and local government, many councils around the country suddenly had to find loads of money because they fell foul of equalities law. And I think there are issues here around this.
Look, we're going to come back to this with all of you. And nobody, of course, disputes that there are real cases of hardship. It is just a question of whether this is the best way of dealing with it. So please don't go away. There's so much to talk about. Plus, I will be talking to the Housing and Communities Secretary, Robert Jenrick. And then later, I'll be uncorking the cork.
Hello, welcome to The Break, #Peston. I've got our guests with us because we're going to do our weekly predictions for this election. Here you go. Here are all our guests. And Saida, you predicted once before that it would be a hung parliament with the Tories 3 short. You can change that if you want.
Yeah, I'm going to change it. So that was done pre the Brexit party announcing that it wouldn't be fielding any candidates against Tory-held seats. I actually think that's going to make a material difference.
So what are you going with now?
I think it's going to be a 30-seat majority for the Conservatives.
T30. Right, there you go. Lucy?
Oh, God, I really don't want to make a prediction. I've got it so wrong the last few elections.
Don't worry, we'll just tweet you on election night. It'll be fine.
Yeah, well, you remember the pictures of me at the last election night going, oh my God, because we all didn't think. I'm going to still say I think it will be a hung parliament.
And how short will which party be?
I don't know. Just a hung parliament.
Somewhere here?
Yeah.
Can we do that, or does that put her
Yeah.
in the box of shame? OK, we're going to forgive you. You normally go in the box of shame if you don't go with more
OK, sorry.
definite answers. John?
I'm going to go with the hung parliament as well, or possibly a very small Tory majority.
Oh, so
So
come on.
maybe
Come on.
5.
A Tory majority of
Tory
5?
majority of...
So no Labour SNP deal then?
Well, I'm going to be kind of swithering on the border between Tory majority of 5 or a hung parliament.
OK.
So I'm keeping my options open here.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot of tactical voting.
And John Ashworth is, what was it? Labour majority 50. There you go. Thank you very much.
What's John been drinking?
Welcome back. It's Anushka.
Thank you, Robert. I just want to show you an interview that Boris Johnson has done in tomorrow's Spectator. He stresses his government's change of direction on austerity. Perhaps no surprise there, but he actually goes quite a lot further, claiming he was always against it and saying, I remember having conversations with colleagues in the government that came in 2010 saying I thought austerity was just not the right way forward for the UK. I'm not sure how publicly vocal he was about that. In fact, a guest we have later on, David Gauke, was in the Treasury at the time. He might be able to tell us whether the conversation was had behind closed doors. Robert.
Thanks. Yeah, quite a lot to talk to David Gauke about in terms of his erstwhile relationship with the Prime Minister. Now, before we get to that, I had a conversation only a few minutes ago with the Housing and Communities Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick, and I began by pointing out to him that government documents that Labour showed us today showed the US wants extended patents on American-made drugs, and that raised the risk of prices going up for the NHS.
Well, no, we've learnt today a document which sets out what one might expect to be the opening position of US trade negotiators. I don't think that's any great surprise, but we couldn't have been clearer, as you say, both in our manifesto and in the statements that the Prime Minister's made, that the NHS is not for sale. We have no intention of seeing drug prices rise or US pharmaceutical companies or other major international companies coming into the NHS. So this really is a big distraction by Jeremy Corbyn to hide, I'm afraid, his disastrous interview yesterday with Andrew Neil and to obfuscate the fact that their Brexit position is falling apart at the seams. And it's quite sad, I think, actually, that they're using this tactic because it's designed to scare people, particularly vulnerable people who don't want to see privatisation or charging in the NHS when, of course, we have absolutely no intention of doing that.
But I mean, you're sitting literally just, a mile or so away from the City of London. our banks, our insurance companies, they all want better access to America. So if you're faced with a choice about improving access for the city to the US and, allowing American pharmaceutical companies better access to the NHS, you'll sell out the NHS, won't you?
No, we've been very clear. We've made our choice, essentially, which is that we love the NHS, we care about it. It's an incredibly important national institution, and we have absolutely no intention of putting it on the table in the trade negotiations to come. And you even saw that, I think, when Donald Trump was on LBC a few weeks ago, when he criticised the Prime Minister and the government, saying that the trade deal would be more limited in scope because of that decision. He acknowledged the fact that we had made that decision. It's an important one. It's one we entirely stand behind. And if we're lucky enough to be re-elected on the 12th of December and proceed with those trade negotiations, be in no doubt, and the US shouldn't be under any illusions, the NHS will not be on the table. It will certainly not be for sale.
But it's not altogether surprising that not everybody trusts you. I mean, you've got a Prime Minister who says you're building 40 new hospitals. The reality is 6.
We are building 40 more hospitals. It obviously takes time to build hospitals. I have one next to me, the QMC in Nottingham. It takes years to plan.
Yeah, but there are only going to be 6 within any meaningful timetable.
So it's perfectly legitimate to say that providing the seed capital to do the planning stages of some of those hospitals is the first step, and then the full capital costs will flow in due course. That's the same way as you would plan roads or railways or other big capital investments.
But look, another example. Just on Sunday, the Prime Minister announces 50,000 nurses, but actually, there are only going to be about 19,000 British trained nurses in that 50,000, and you can't be confident the other 31,000 will arrive, or indeed stay.
No, again, that's not quite correct. We've said that there will be 50,000 more nurses as a result of the actions that we're going to take. You're absolutely right that a portion of those will come from taking a series of steps to ensure that we can retain existing nurses better than we are doing at the moment within the NHS, and also draw some back from retirement or other activities back into the NHS. But, I think most people within the NHS and within the nursing profession would think those are laudable aims, and that we should have a comprehensive strategy to improve retention and to bring people back who are highly qualified and trained into the profession from other activities. So that's an entirely sensible proposition. And we've been very clear that as a result of those activities and the recruitment of entirely new nurses altogether, we'll end up with 50,000 more.
Let's go to your own. Let's go to your own area.
Parroting the Labour lines on hospitals.
I never parrot anybody's lines, but I do want to take you into your own area of housing, where perhaps you're being a bit too honest, because you've got a Labour Party proposing 100,000 a year new council houses, 50,000 housing association houses. There's almost nothing in your manifesto about housing, particularly affordable housing.
No, I don't think that's true at all, actually. We've made a big commitment, which is to build 1 million more properties. We are actually doing that at the moment. So the changes that we've made as a government, the planning reforms and the infrastructure investments are working. Last year, we built more homes than we've done in any year for the last 30 years.
Are you saying social housing doesn't matter? Are you saying social housing does not matter?
No, not at all. We've committed £9 billion to build more affordable homes. That's going to deliver
social housing, I'm talking
of
about.
1 million affordable properties. But look, the Labour Party don't have any credibility on this.
Not
Another example
housing.
of the Labour Party saying things which they just don't deliver on. In the last year, we've built more council houses in this country than Labour built in the whole 13 years of the last Labour government.
Tiny number. But look, let's move on. We see in tomorrow's Spectator that the Prime Minister is saying that he felt, right at the outset, that austerity was a mistake. We've got Dominic Cummings, his chief aide, saying today in a blog that he feels austerity was a mistake and is doing you enormous damage in this general election. You were a member of the last government. Was austerity a mistake?
Well, look, I only came into Parliament in 2014, but I remember the state that the country was left in 2010. The public finances were a mess. The economy had crashed. The housing market was at the worst state it's been in since the 1920s. We had to make very difficult decisions at that point. And I think it was right that we did that. But now, as a result
so just to be clear, the Prime Minister and Dominic Cummings are wrong. The austerity was not a mistake, is what you're saying.
No, I'm saying that we had to make very difficult decisions at that time. But as a result of managing the economy responsibly for 9 years, as a result of the record levels of employment and the tax revenues that have flown from that, as a result of the booming parts of the economy, like the tech sector, for example, those parts of the economy that have recovered very significantly and grown, as a result of 9 years of a growing economy, albeit growing slower than we would like it to be, as a result of all those things, we are in a different position today, and that enables us to invest more in public services. I think that's what the public want and expect, and you see that reflected very clearly in the priorities that the Prime Minister has set out from the beginning of his premiership, from the record investments in the NHS, the higher funding for every pupil in every school in education, and getting more police officers onto the streets. These are the people's priorities, and it's right to spend public money on those. But you've got to do it responsibly, and the promises that we've made already and we've set out in our manifesto are fully costed, or ones we think can be afforded by the country while staying within the public finances.
I think we know your position on that, and I'm almost out of
scale to that.
I'm almost out of
cost a lot of money.
I'm almost out of time. I've got a couple of very quick ones. The Prime Minister has now apologised for Islamophobia, but some people still think you should have a narrowly focused investigation of Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. Why aren't you?
Well, I think it's right that we do an independent-led inquiry into all forms of prejudice, discrimination and racism, which will include
But Islamophobia is the issue that people say is the biggest problem for the Tory party.
Well, some people say that, but I think it's proper to look at all of our processes. How do we handle complaints? Do we have the right procedures? Are we robust enough in taking action against individuals? I think generally we are. We have chucked out, for example, a number of candidates at this election who said things that were frankly unacceptable. I want to see that continue. We're also, in my department, doing an inquiry into a national definition of Islamophobia, which will be to accompany the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Again, I think that's the right step for us to take as a government. But I would say this, that I don't think there's any moral equivalence to the relatively isolated cases that you've seen within the Conservative Party and the strong action that we're willing to take when we encounter them, and Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, where anti-Semitism, as the Chief Rabbi and many others have said in recent days, has become institutionalised to the point where you find 50% of British Jews saying they would leave the country if there was a Jeremy Corbyn premiership.
Plainly for voters to decide. One very, very quick one. Where's Jacob Rees-Mogg?
He's in North Somerset. You should go and see him.
So why is he not
That's his constituency, Robert.
as conspicuous as normal?
Well, I don't know. I've seen him on Twitter. I've seen him out and about on the streets of various very charming-looking towns and villages in Somerset. I suggest you get in the car down to the West Country and go and find him if you want to.
Lovely. Great to see you as always.
Thank you.
So just before I go to my next guest, David, I just want to pick up with actually Saeed Avasi. Your colleague, Robert Jenrick, says that the country, should be satisfied with a broad investigation being carried out by the Tory party into all forms of sort of race and religious hatred. You were sort of frowning. You think there should be a narrowly focused inquiry, I think.
Well, I think the whole country heard Boris Johnson and every other leadership candidate during that leadership race earlier this year, when every one of them promised to have a specific inquiry into Islamophobia. The fact that we're backpedaling from that and we're trying to water it down clearly shows that we haven't understood the issue of Islamophobia within our party. And you know what's really disturbing, actually, is that tomorrow morning, we've got the Prime Minister writing an article in The Spectator, a magazine which only recently published an article which said there isn't enough Islamophobia within the Conservative Party. This is how seriously he takes it, that's the publication he chose to write this article in. I mean, my party has been brought to this issue kicking and screaming. It has been embarrassing.
And this issue of a
for me to
definition
do
of
this.
Islamophobia, which he says still needs to be sort of nailed down?
I mean, even we have learned nothing from the Labour Party's experience on the way that they messed up on the IHRA definition on anti-Semitism. There is a definition of Islamophobia. It's been adopted by every political party, the Lib Dems, the Labour Party, the SNP, indeed even the Conservatives in Scotland. But the only party...
candidates in the last fortnight over Islamophobic tweets. Two out of 50.
But interestingly on that, you know, I do think in some senses you've got to give credit to the Tory party. They've been kicked out as soon as it's emerged. Some people would say...
suspended. They've been suspended. But the thing about these suspensions is they always seem to remain in suspension for indefinite periods of time without it ever reaching a definitive conclusion.
But to be
but they're not allowed to be candidates.
Well, one of them is going to stay on the ballot paper because it's too late to
No, but
chuck
to be
her off.
fair, Rob, there are candidates standing for my party in this election with clear evidence of Islamophobia being presented to the party. A candidate in Lincoln, for example. I can tell you there are 5 candidates still standing, not suspended, who will go into this election with allegations of Islamophobia around their necks, and they have not been suspended from the party, so they're not taking it seriously.
As you say, allegations not proven. Now, don't go away, because after the break, I will be talking to a former Tory, now an independent, David Gork, who will be telling me why he no longer has confidence in either Tory or indeed the Labour Party. See you in a bit.
Hello, welcome to The Break. I'm joined by David Gork, and I'm sorry about this. This is a mean one, right? You know you're obsessed with unicorns.
Yes, there we go.
There you go. Good to get away for a few days, but somehow I kept getting reminded of the Brexit debate. Well, we're going to have a little drawing session here for you. OK, I have put a pen on here.
Yes.
I want you to start by drawing us a unicorn.
So what do I do?
Have
just
you
with
been
the finger?
practicing this?
No,
just draw it. Yeah,
just with
use
the
your
finger.
Yeah.
Finger, right, OK, all right.
Is this really going to be a unicorn? Oh, my God. Looks like a dinosaur.
Oh. There we go. Hold on.
Oh, no, actually, always suddenly it's coming together.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Yeah, OK.
Yeah.
Here you go. You ready? Right, what is your unicorn called? Now it looks like a cow.
There we go.
It looks like a cow.
That's very mean. Should we call it Donald?
Donald,
yeah. Donald?
OK,
yeah,
okay.
hold on. Oh, so I'll go on after you.
What did
I've
I
fucked
do?
it up now, haven't I?
I've just given him
A name. What have you done?
Sorry.
God,
Donald.
yeah.
Has Donald got any special powers?
Donald, special powers. Oh, I don't know. Does he can make things up?
He can make things up. What's his motto?
His motto?
Yeah.
Make unicorns great. Again.
OK, here we go.
Yeah.
Mugger. Make uniforms great. Mugger.
Mugger, very good.
Political allegiance.
Well, I think I think he might be backing Boris on this one.
He's a Tory.
I think he might be.
Here we go. Thank you
go.
very much
All right,
for that.
there you go.
Yeah, he's got a home, politically
He's got a home,
speaking.
politically home, yes.
More than you.
More than some, yes.
More than some. Thank you very much.